Welcome to selfdiscoverymedia.com, where the orchard of wisdom shows are at your fingertips. It ignites your soul, your heart, your spirit, your mind, and your body with illumination from people who have made the journey before you. They're here now to help you on your journey, on your path of self-discovery. We are funded by you, the audience, and the people we interview. If you wish to support us, please go to selfdiscoverymedia.com and press on our Fund Action button. Anything is appreciated. We'd like you to sit back and enjoy the shows. Here we go. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of An Author's Kiss right here on selfdiscoverymedia.com. I'm your host, Sarah Troy, and my guest today is Don Cook. He has written a book that we're going to be talking all about today, and sorry, I'm just trying to get my page to come down here. Now, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce this. So you're going to have to help me, Don. Is it Ithiliana?
Ithiana, yes.
Ithiana, the last daughter of Atlantis. Now, I've read some books on Atlantis before. Somebody who actually channeled the Atlantis before it sank, and I'm always fascinated with what goes on at Atlantis. So I'm looking forward to learning more about your book here today. But you like to layer the world of science and religion in this in Crisset first installment of the Last of the Atlantean series. And in this book, in this saga, not only about humanity, but the entire world is in danger of becoming extinct. And can humanity be saved and transported to another planet? Can an alien help save humanity? And you hold readers right on the edge to find out what's going on right to the finish line. You enjoy writing. It's meaningful tales that force the reader to question everything and not to be blind. For the seeker individual who wants to discover good moral foundation can find it wrapped up in an adventurous tale. I like that a lot. Writing is something that really can take people on a wondrous journey, but it always leaves them with a what if, or questioning something that's going on in their own lives. So whether you're taking something from the past or you're taking them to outer space or to a totally different world or dimension, it's always something that reflects back on our own living, doesn't it? Welcome to the show, Don.
Thank you for having me.
So Atlantis, why Atlantis? What's your fascination there?
Well, at first I based this book, Ithiana, Last Out of Atlantis, on a short film I made when I went back to school in 2009. I went to Fanshawe College here in London. And by the way, forgive me if I talk a little bit like Brains from Thunderbirds, the kind of people who think fast and they talk.
Yeah, don't worry about it. That's okay.
Anyway, as I was going to say, when I made Ithiana, the book, first, it goes back to 2009 when I decided to do my capstone project, The Last Atlantean. And I started off, and it took place in the present day with a guy laying out on the beach after an all-night party on the beach, and he was a bit out of it, still recovering, and even having a flashback to the night before, saying his girlfriend dumped him.
Oh dear.
And then he sees a lovely lady who comes out of the water, and she claims and the name's a little bit different, Ithionica, last daughter of Atlantis. And then she and Jake go, the protagonist in the film, go back to Jake's girlfriend's place, a little bit further inland, and then she relates to him about what happened to Atlantis and history ever since. And she makes the observation that humanity is making the same mistakes that Atlantis did. It's not by chance that Atlantis fell into the ocean. And there's a reason why I wrote the book. Like I used the film as my calling card to try and get into the film industry, but going to the film industry did not work. And knowing the way things are now, I'm glad I didn't get in, because it's such a cuckoo industry.
It's a hard industry, yes.
Hard and crazier than ever before. So I decided to go back to my first love, creative writing. Ithiana, Last Out of Atlantis book one's not my first book. My first book was a failed book called The Invader Candidate. Think of it as Invasion of the Body Snatchers meets the Manchurian Candidate.
Wow. My mind is
And
boggling.
yes, and I like taking science fiction themes and ideas, and I like making it relatable to people, because one of the complaints a lot of people have about science fiction is the characters are usually two-dimensional. Thankfully, that's becoming less and less the case. But
yeah,
some of the so-called geeks tend to want the characters two-dimensional and more cerebral. But for me, I just got to write what I write,
you're right.
and nothing more, nothing less. And when I wrote the first book failed, but I learned a lot from the failure. And so when
there
I
it didn't
wrote,
fail. It was just a lesson learned.
yes, it was a lesson, and sometimes when our first works don't always succeed. So I wrote Ithiana, Last Out of Atlantis, especially after years and years and years of my father urging me to write it. My dad, Gerald, wanted me to make this book, make the short film into something bigger like this book. And so I decided, okay, what do I use as the basis? Then I thought, wait a minute, the story of Atlantis and its downfall into the sea, it parallels so greatly the story of the flood of Noah. And when I decided to take the approach of folding the Atlantean downfall into the story of Noah's flood, because a lot of people seem to think that, and it's legend and says that Atlantis was very advanced. And I took the idea found in Matthew 24:37, which says, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be before the coming of the Son of Man. I'm just paraphrasing, but still I thought, well, okay, if Atlantis was so advanced, maybe they had technology on par or far more advanced than our own.
Yes.
Like, I'm going to hold up something that one of my main characters, Atlantean Inventions, or rather our version of it, the smartphone. Like, they have what they call, their version of the smartphone was calm crystals. One piece that did everything a smartphone can do and a whole lot more, that probably even our computer scientists may not be able to think up even for about a few decades yet. And she rides on a hover bike, the maglev powered vehicle from Back to the Future.
Yes.
Well, think of someone bombing around Atlantean towns and cities in the countryside in a hover version of a motorbike. And she loves doing that, and some people can be the sweetest, kindest, most civil people when they're not behind the wheel or the handlebars of a vehicle, but put them behind the wheel or the handlebars of a motorbike.
Yes, they're let loose.
They let loose, and you know what? That's what Ithiana is like. A demon behind the handlebars.
Right.
And she always gets out of a mess she has with the Law Knights, their version of our police officers, by doing the same thing with the police officers of her day, what Obi-Wan Kenobi did in Star Wars 4.
I'm not the person you're looking for.
Or I didn't go that fast. I was keeping my time with the flow of the traffic, when in fact she could have broken this Atlantean speed limit thousands of times over, and just is lucky enough to. In fact, at the start of the book, I have the main character's sister, Bianya, who, by the way, turns out to be the wife of Shen by the story's end. She complains to her adopted sister, Ithiana, that's a 10th road rat she's beaten in the mud.
Little daredevil, but we always need a daredevil as a heroine, don't we? Because
someone who's not perfect,
right, but also courage.
Guts,
isn't
and chutzpah,
and fearless. You need somebody like that, otherwise they're going to be crippled by what happens instead of being able to push through it. It's very interesting why you're describing Atlanteans, because as I said, this one author that I interviewed, she conduit writed, like it just came through her, it just was channeled through her, and she wrote this entire I don't know if it was 2 books or 3 books on Atlantis and it falling, and the way you're describing the crystals, that was the communication. It was also the power source. And it was the
Yes.
removal of that power source that caused it to collapse. And hoverboard, they had hover vehicles as well. So, and she had downloaded this so from, you know, from the Atlantean spirit. So you're right on par there with
Yeah.
the way she described it.
Although I must admit that I got it from research and deduction.
Mm-hmm.
And with me, I decided, you talk about courage in the main character. Well, it takes a lot of guts to realize your world's about to end and getting people off to another planet.
Yeah.
And I was partly, when it came to the story of Noah's flood and legends about Atlantis, Sarah, I also was influenced by 2 fictional works. One was the movie When Worlds Collide from 1951, based upon the book of the same name, published in the 30s. And the other work was one from your country. It was a TV show called Alternative 3, which was a fictional. It was released back in June of 1977, and it was the last episode of a alleged science magazine factual show called Science Report. It was a science magazine with credible science, but then they weren't going to be picked up by the ITV, so they decided, okay, let's go out with a funny bang. Let's do a good spoof. And they even had the air date right down to the planned air date, that is for April 1st, 1977, April Fool's Day, because they wanted to make it an April Fool's joke. And unfortunately, because of the labor problems in Britain at that time, the air date got pushed back to June of 1977, and the humor was lost. And a lot of, if you recall, or having read from history about the craziness that went on in America because of the War of the Worlds broadcast by Orson Welles in 1938, almost 39 years later, Britain experienced a similar panic because of Alternative 3, where they also proposed, because of the deteriorating conditions on Earth, that they get a human survival colony to at least the moon or maybe to Mars. And it's on, you can find it online. If you can find it online.
Yes, I have to look at that. I wasn't living in the country at that time, so I don't know
so
it.
it's
I'm not familiar with it.
Alternative
3. I'm going to write that down. I mean, definitely
and it's
look
the
it up.
number 3, by the way.
Yeah.
Alternative 3. And it had an actual news journalist named Tim Brinton as its host.
I will look that up for sure.
Yes, and it's something that when you look at it, it was shown on every country on Earth except the United States. It was shown twice in Canada on the then fledgling Global Network, that is Global TV Network, twice, and the second time they had a disclaimer. But in the United States, they did not show it because everybody thought that, all the network executives thought that this was hitting a little too close to home, and that the Americans would think it was the real thing, what with Vietnam, Watergate, and all that sort of thing. And they actually had a law passed that prohibited the broadcasting of things purported to be newscasts, and in fact, they were fictional presentations. And whenever they do anything like that, Sarah, they have to put in some indication early on that it is just a dramatization.
Right. Yeah, which we see now more, don't we, in movies? This is fiction. And no, actually, I was living in South Africa at that time. We didn't have TV in 77. So it might have come there later.
I knew that it took a while. It took a while for South Africa to get TV into their nation, because I guess it was because they didn't want outside influences contaminating their society.
They were part of that, but also part of that, they just hadn't got there yet. And when they did, they had an Afrikaans night, an Afrikaans language night and an English night, and the Afrikaans people bought up all the the big shows and dubbed them, so you never got to see them in
Yes.
English. So there was a battle going on between the English and the Afrikaans, and of course they have more channels now, but at that time it wasn't
Yeah.
even worth having a TV. So
And Afrikaans is based on Dutch, if
yes,
I'm not
yes, they call it
mistaken.
the kitchen Dutch. So because it's
Kitchen
kind of
Dutch.
kitchen
Kind of like
Dutch.
Quebec French is based on the French language, but is actually a language all its own in many
Oh yeah,
respects.
definitely a totally different dialect, like Australian English, English. There's
But at least with
everybody takes on his own
Australian and
dialect.
British
Yeah.
English,
Hmm.
Canada, that there's dialects and then there's thick dialects that make their tongue almost another language.
Oh yeah, definitely. You
Anyway,
should try speak
back to
Scottish.
I no anyway.
But it's so fascinating how you got all your information. So you must love diving into the mysteries of planetary. Were you a Star Wars fan?
Well, I'm a Star Trek fan.
Okay, not a Wars.
Well, I like Star Wars, but I'm more like a casual fan of Star Wars. I'm more of a Star Trek person. And even then it's with William Shatner's butt in the command chair.
Right. Well, recently they've just had the 55 years of Star Trek kind of behind the scenes and how the shows were done. And it is actually incredible that literally they would have it in the can 3 days before it's meant to, the movies are meant to be released. And
Yeah.
the fighting that went on and just
Yeah.
the dysfunction that went on and what they managed to produce was absolutely amazing when
Yeah.
you think of behind the scenes what was going on. If
Yeah.
you have a chance to
Especially
see
the
that, do watch
classics,
it.
especially the classic Trek. I've heard there
Mm.
was a lot of arguing in that on that set.
Oh, I know it wasn't so much the set itself. It was they cancelled it, and then it was a cult favorite, and they wanted
Yes,
to bring it
Beale
back.
Trimble.
And
Beale
Gene
Trimble
Roddenberry
brought it
wanted.
back.
Mm-hmm. And Gene Roddenberry wanted it his way, and they brought somebody else in who was going to do it their way. And Gene Roddenberry
Yeah.
would hijack the script and rewrite it, and there was this battle going
Oh
back and
yeah.
forth. So
Oh,
it is absolutely
TV
fascinating
politics.
that, yeah, exactly. But it's fascinating that anything got in the can, and yet never,
Yes.
did so well. And I love Star Trek too, especially the where the breakoffs and all of that, and the newer movies. But um, I'm definitely a Star Warsy. I like May the Force be with you. So
Well, I always say to each their own.
yeah, exactly.
And I
But it's
find that
taking.
I'm also more than a Star Trek fan. I'm more of a Jerry Anderson fan.
Mm-hmm.
The guy behind Thunderbirds, Fireball XL5, UFO, Captain Scarlet, and Space 1999.
Right.
Although with the
Yes.
last one, although with the last one, I still don't see why I see charm in it.
I actually met the main actor for that. He was in South Africa doing a play of
Martin
space.
Landau?
Oh gosh, I can't remember his name now. The dark-haired young man, the kind of
Is it Martin Landau?
do you know, I don't remember. I'm talking too many years ago because I'm talking back mid-70s. And he was over there doing a play, but he was the main actor, the young, suave, dark-haired young man that was in there, which was very, very interesting because a lot of actors are very good at stepping in and out of roles, but it always comes from the core of who they are. They always bring an essence of themselves. And with him, there wasn't an essence of himself. He became each role he was, and then he would dive in and out of roles in real life because he didn't have an essence of himself, which was really interesting. So, but don't know, I can't remember his name. It's too long ago, but I've always been a sci-fi fan. I love sci-fi. I love Out of Worlds. I love the, where it takes us, the wonder of it, and it makes us look at Earth one with more appreciation of the beauty that we have here and the sustainability that we're given here. But it also shows us how small we are in the universe, and where we're inclined to think we're it all. We're just earthlings. We're the superior amongst the universe, and I think we're the kindergarten amongst the universe. I think there are many species out there far more advanced than us.
Yeah. Well, I've often thought. Sometimes I often think that that Earthlings are often the juvenile delinquents of the
Yes.
universe.
Yes.
In fact,
Slow to learn.
the other night, I think it was either last night or the night before, I watched a 1960s movie called Lord Love a Duck with Roddy McDowall and Tuesday Weld, and this was a really biting satire of life in California, especially, but where in the trailer, someone once mentioned, the narrator, the announcer mentioned in the trailer that Earth is the insane asylum of the galaxy.
Yeah, that makes
And
sense.
normally it's Lord Love a Duck was a beach party film, but it was also a teenage high school film. It took a jab at California culture, American pop culture.
Mm-hmm.
Literally, when you find somebody that the one person you can root for is actually a rotter themselves, it's a real biting commentary on the world of that day. And let's just say it didn't do well at all at the box office, even though it got critical praise. Well, anyway, in my book, I decided to just take the world as I've known it, plus what I've learned from history over the last, I guess you could say 90, 100 years. The idea of stock market crashes in 1929 and 1987, 2008. I decided to use the term share market crashes because outside of the United States, stock is also called shares. And I decided to take what I knew and, as I say, Atlanteanize it. And I decided to have, when they talk about God, the average Atlantean talking about God, they talk about the gods of the mountains. Their favorite being a more moral version of Aphrodite known as Aphrodia. And that this nominal Aphrodian at Ithiana sacrificed doves as part of a ritual. But in the book, God, the Judeo-Christian God, as I personified him, the former Lion of Judah, a semi-nod to C.S. Lewis, obviously does not like the idea of sacrificing doves.
No, they're the purest. No.
They're the purest, and it's a case of even the main character's mentally mother figure, Dr. Zakrovia, who I made a female, I based on Andrei Sakharov and Alexander Solzhenitsyn as a Lemurian scientist who defects to Atlantis. And I don't think I've ever written I don't think anybody's written an Atlantean story quite like mine before, because I take certain conventions about Atlantis, but I throw the majority of them out. I just put them on the shelf.
Right. So you've kind of mixed a few genres, a little bit like the villain from Captain America, and a few other type of people into Atlantean, and you've mixed it up quite considerably and created your own Atlantean.
Yes, and I hope you don't mind, but I actually decided to make Lemuria a rogue state, a rogue empire. At war with Atlantis, a constant Cold War that sometimes turns into a hot war. And if you look at it, the enemy ruler of Lemuria is Anarchia Zay Twank. At least she becomes that after a military coup against a Gorbachev-like Krukzavia. Because I remember the coup that Gorbachev was temporarily deposed by a coup.
Right, temporarily.
Temporarily. But this one, I said, what if it was permanent? You would have today's mess with Ukraine or some other place more quicker than you have in the 21st century. It would have been earlier on in history. It takes the right bad person to take a nation and make it so evil.
Yeah.
Or just take the nations hostage.
Yes.
And so I decided to have every. I decided to make my Lemuria based upon every fascist and communist dictatorship I was aware of, and make it female dominated.
So the females are the villains?
In from if you're an if you're from if you're there, in many ways they're more like the Russians, in the sense that there are a lot of Russians who are good today,
Yes.
but there are a lot of Russians that are not so good. And I would say, as much as I hate to say it, every story needs a villain or a villainous element. You talked about, why do we love villains so much, or why do we love having an enemy in our lives? And I would say, if you're going to talk about comic book villains, they're the worst kind, because they're too this and that. But in a written work that is a prose work, you delve into the character more. You delve into the minds of a character, and that, let's just say, the reason why Zaytwank took over Lemuria was because she saw the suffering of the women of her people, because men were emancipated, and that others were emancipated, but that a lot of good patriotic Lemurian women fell on hard times and may have lived out in the streets. So she used that as an opportunity for a long-term goal: conquest of Lemuria and implementation of a 10-part plan. And let's just say, the Atlantean women, they have a loveliness all their own, and it varies from woman to woman. And Ethiana, I decided to make her like a beautiful millennial woman, as in of the millennial generation. Those in their 20s and 30s. And she is the brainiest of them, and is whatchamacallit, altruistic, and has a good sense of what's going on, and did a lot of research. However, she also has a lot of flaws, where she can be a bit of a prissy princess, and she can be naughty. And you know what? Maybe she needs this naughty streak.
Yes, that's the gumption.
The gumption. She's got gumption, and let's just say, in the book, I even have her succumbing to frat girl temptations that so many poor young ladies succumb to when they're in college, university, that so many guys succumb to when they're in college, university.
Yes.
And let's just say, if you know anything about how wild and sexually wild and perverse college students of either gender can get, she fell victim of that when her own alma mater literally won the Gemstone Cup, a collegiate championship, and they just went. You know how people can go rioting and go crazy when their favorite team wins or loses? Well, when her institute, Vanskla, won the Gemstone Cup, they went all out and just went on an orgy that would make Romans look like Puritans.
Oh my goodness. So definitely you have very diverse in there. You really have a lot going on in there. You haven't just got one kind of straight linear story. You've really created multiple worlds there that are all part facets of it.
And that even her mother was a bad girl gone good, and became someone who was a moral figure, like the main character, like the main character's wife in Seventh Heaven. So she went from being
on the wild side,
a Jack Kerouac of the antediluvian world, who swam around like Jack Kerouac would have hitchhiked across the USA, and she went from that to being a nice model mom, someone that any authority figure would love to have in their community.
So that the wildness that she was is in her daughter.
Yes, her biological daughter.
Right.
And her dad wasn't exactly that tame a guy either, but he learned. But what snapped her dad out of it was was a desire to help others by being a landlord who literally wanted the best for his tenants and wanted to either rent or sell excellent properties to various kinds of people in various businesses, farmers, people want to own their own homes on varying scales, all the way from basic housing to upscale stuff that literally someone in Beverly Hills would find even would be out of their price range, but because he was a generous soul, he practices altruism through how he did business.
Right. So kind of you've taken kind of mainstream living, you've taken, you know, out of world influence, you know, you've taken different multiple dimensions in there, and you've weaved it all together. Now that must be very hard to weave everything together, because when people watch or read sci-fi, they expect to be in an outer world, not kind of in a world that's very familiar, to a world that's very extreme, to another world that's this. The weaving of it together must have been quite a challenge.
Well, you know what? To me, it was a challenge. If it was a challenge, I didn't see it as such. I saw it more like my own version of a game.
Right.
And just the creative process, and how could I make a convention from the world we've known and make it into some that would be different but relatable. And I decided even to have the old myth of Gilgamesh, reimagined completely, because instead of the eternal wanderer that our legends of Gilgamesh spoke of, I decided to first of all take the name Gilgamesh and divide it into two, where he would introduce himself as being, the name is Gilgamesh. Because I had him being, and he is a James Bond, a spy who works for Tarsunians, but on the side of freedom, which Atlantis is part of. So, and he was a bit of a suave, naughty boy spy and I decided to take James Bond and Gilgamesh him. And that even have a convention with James Bond. His movies are full of, and books are full of gadgets of different types. Well, I decided to have a helicopter rotor pack of someone who was spied on Noah's camp, and have it where just pull on a string and rotors prop up over until they're over the pilot's head, and then the rotors would start up with side fins deployed also, and away the pilot went, like those rocket packs they had in the 50s and 60s.
Yes, James Bond had one at one of his shows. Which one was that he had that? It wasn't Goldfinger.
Well, I forget which one it was myself, but I decided to have that convention, and even a gas pellet not from Bond, but from the Green Hornet. And which would, when you fire at it, it'll explode about a foot or two in front of the intended victim, and just the gas would spew out and knock them out.
Yeah.
And that's, yeah.
What kind of movies I mean, Star Trek definitely, and clearly a lot of other movies, but were you a Captain Atlantis fan? Were you a Doctor Strange fan? You know, were you what is it, Dark Matter, the dark one? You know, what are these movies or characters have influenced you?
Well, let's just say some of them I based on real life persons. Some of them I based on characters from other genres. Like, I've often thought, like, the detective that is going to conduct a structured intervention against Bionia, whom his employer wanted to frame as delusional and wanted to get her away from Noah. I thought, what if Joe Friday from Dragnet went bad after he retired and became a private eye because he needed the money? And when it came to the Ithiana's neighbors, the Marchands, I decided to have them being like a Hollywood couple that's conservative, but where they don't get married.
Mm-hmm.
And that happens. And I based Lux the Echo, where Ithiana lived, on a basic California community from as far north as San Francisco all the way down to San Diego, with Los Angeles being the heaviest influence.
Mm-hmm.
And even if the map shows that Ithiana's coastal city of Lux the Echo was in a similar environment to Los Angeles, and that there was, and I had my main character's circle of friends being what used to pass for California Republicans,
Mm-hmm.
conservative people in California who supported the likes of Reagan and other Republicans. And if you think about it, one of the worst examples of a California Republican is Richard Milhouse Nixon.
Mm-hmm.
But he was still a California Republican.
Right.
And
Right.
I just,
So
yeah,
you
and
really pay attention to shows, and do you watch the news, or are you taking the historical facts from things that you've read? Things that you
more like
know that way.
history,
More history, right?
more history and old TV shows.
Mm,
And the main character, well, the head of the Free Atlantis movement, the Freebies, I have him being sort of like a Gentile Southern bumpkin, Jerry Lewis type at first, but when he visits the main character's dad and their friends, he's more like a cultured Southern gentleman, a strange kind of contradiction in terms, an educated, well-spoken, well-dressed clanner type.
mm,
And I have except for the racism, the free Atlanteans, you could call them clanners or survivalists or what have you. And but the one thing that's common is that except for kids that are minors, the free Atlanteans are made up of primarily older people who just don't like the direction the world is taking. And so they want to restore, and to them, bumping off young adults was part of the deal. And that if you look at it, a lot of older people, not every older person, but there are
no,
those older folks who really, not everyone, and I don't think you're one of them,
no, definitely not.
but I think a lot of older people might be sympathetic to free Atlanteans if they're conservative survivalists.
Mm-hmm.
But the spectralists, their antithesis is they stand for anything left wing. Simple
Mm-hmm.
as that. Anything left wing. And that even their superhero costume type outfits are rainbow colored.
Mm-hmm.
And they have and then there's the crescentarians that look like green robed Jawas from Star Wars. So there was a bit of influence from Star Wars, along with Ithiana's use of Ben Kenobi type force powers on cops. And I've also watched the Omega Man starring Charlton Heston, how the crazies in that film attacked Heston whenever he was out and about at night or had to be forced in. And I use that craziness when all Gehenna breaks loose once the Lemurians launch the EMP gems, which are launched from cannons that reach a certain height, and then rocket engines built in kick in and propel the EMP gems to a certain height above Atlantis or wherever, and all the lights go out, and except for those that are in hardened structures or in spaceships that are hardened against radiation, and so I actually had, instead of normal hover vehicles for the free Atlanteans when they attacked Atlantean, I had them in what they call wheel trucks.
Mm-hmm.
They're a lot like our heavy rigs and heavy vans with EMP hardened engines. And so when they went, they shook up the roads, which were not normally accustomed
Right.
to wheeled trucks,
Right.
and how I had them drive over the stalled Atlantean traffic like they were monster trucks. You've seen monster trucks, how they literally
Yes.
roll, and think about them rolling over, and then when they get to Common Square, which is sort of like, which was influenced, by the way, by Nathan Phillips Square, or the idea thereof, and the political rally was held, literally the freebies went ape.
Mm-hmm. You have a lot in this book. I'm going to bring your attention to the people that you have Asperger's, right?
I'm Aspergers Syndrome.
Right. Now, I've interviewed a few people with Asperger's, and what I've always found is there was another young woman she's a graphic artist, and she has written a trilogy where she's literally created all of her own characters, and she's written them in a totally different world, and she's drawn them as well. And what I've found with people with Asperger's is, or on the slightly different autism type spectrum, is your attention to detail. But the world that you live in is just so very layered. We're inclined to be very linear, like what's happening next, where are we going? Where I find with people with autism or Asperger's, you have wonderful layers that you're rather like Lego, you know how to put together and create into a story. And a lot of people look at, Asperger's or look at autism as something to be sad about. And there are the spectrums where there is the difficulty, but they generally have other layers on top of them. But what I have found is the creativity, and the fact that you can focus so very well on what you're doing, and the detail of what you're doing, and also the way you can shut out to the world that you don't want. You can be in your world and be very happy in there. And if we decide to come into your world and see things from your point of view, we're going to see multiple layers, because it's very misunderstood, Asperger's, isn't it?
Yeah, and you know what? I've been thinking a lot about my life, and Asperger's syndrome. We actually do better with maybe one or two people at a time if it's going to
Yes.
be. But the strangest thing is, when it comes to Asperger's syndrome, addressing a crowd
Mm-hmm.
or an audience or students, if a teacher has Asperger's, that's easy. We're the presenter, whether
Mm-hmm.
we're part of a cast or whether we're the singer or the presenter or lecturer or
Mm-hmm.
the political candidate, where we treat the audience, the people before us, as one big collective person.
Right. Yes. Yes.
Or if we want, or if we go to a concert or a classroom lecture or a rally, we are part of that person.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that but when it comes to cocktail parties or dance parties, we don't do so well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And for me, I find, you mentioned that we have layers. Well, I'll admit my story has layers, but how I write the story, the structure of the story is often where it's like a movie.
Yeah.
Scenes in a movie. When I write a book, I find I best write it either as a first-person narrative or account, or structure it like a movie, complete with scene references and
Mm-hmm.
place, time, even time of day if possible. And literally this is how I find I can make the scenes in a book, string them together as if it was a movie.
You write visually.
I write visually, and when I write, I also include the depth of the character, like what someone is thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Like when a Lemurian submarine captain, she recalls her family, her friends, her mother, her daughter, the boyfriend she has technically as a slave, but still as a boyfriend, her community. She thinks about them, but she realizes she's a soldier and she has to obey orders, especially from the Supreme Mistress Chairwoman of Lemuria, and the kind of person the elites do not dare disobey. And so she says, to the fires with them all. That says to blaze with them all, and then she goes and does her duty of destruction and calls and tells her crew, launch the missiles, as if she was in an American submarine captain given the order to launch the Polaris missiles or anything like them, or the Russians doing the same with their submarine launch missile vessels. So it's kind of like, I like even giving minor characters a bit of depth to them.
Yeah.
And
I like visual writing. I mean, there are some people that write very much to do with the dialogue, and it's very thought-provoking, and it's all about the words. The words are dancing in front of you. But when I read anything, and I'm constantly making a movie at night, there's always a scene going on. My world is like that. I like to read where I'm actually in the movie. I can become one of the characters, and I see it as fluidly as if I'm in that life. I don't want to read it as if it's separate. I want to be a part of it.
Yes. And I try to make it so that at least a lot of different kinds of people can find themselves in the book. Because with Ithiana, a millennial woman who wants to be everything, successful, upper middle class, who has it all or has a lot, and they can relate to her, and that the smart guy, the intelligent thinking man, they can relate to him in the form of Iasco, the love interest of the main character, or an altruistic businessman, the main character's dad, a moral character in the form of Bianya and the family she marries into, that is Noah's family. And so I find, and with California conservative types, they'll find something in the Marchands. I notice that I don't have that many kids in the book, but I do have little boy in the form of the Marchand's young son, Petonio, and that when the graduation ceremony, the main character's neighbor introduces her newborn son, and that she fawns over him as if she was sort of like a second mom. That is, the main character does. And I have you know how sometimes you have people who own restaurants, hot dog stands, or whatever they have in England, the equivalent, or anywhere else. Latke is sort of like that. She loves, and she serves thickies, or as we call them, chocolate milkshakes, and she does not like the use of overuse of calm crystals or cell phones. You know, sometimes we can get so unnerved. Some people get so unnerved when it comes to cell phone usage.
Oh God, yes. Yeah.
And she really gets unnerved, and she even has to put her hand or something in front of her niece's face and her beau's face to get them to stop playing with their calm crystals.
Yes, you know, people have always been afraid of the robots taking over. Well, they just have. They're called cell phones.
Yes, and for me, it's kind of like use only when necessary.
Yeah.
And I find that if you keep technology at arm's length, you'll have a sense of freedom that those who are enslaved to technology never could.
Right. It's there to enhance our life and what we need to do. It's not there to replace us.
Right, exactly. And yeah, you can find anything, and like I said, any kind of character, you can find him or her in that book. I even allude to the fatherly TV anchorman that used to be prevalent on television broadcasts. Like, I don't know what they all had in England for fatherly journalists.
Well, I left England when I was 14, so I don't remember. I live in Canada now. So, but you know,
But
you've
you
got
do
your
Lloyd
Walter
Robertson,
Cronkite's. Oh, Lloyd Robertson, yes, definitely. Yeah, yes.
Cronkite
Yeah.
Robertson, Ed Murrow when he was
Hmm.
for his brief stint on TV, and also Dan Rather,
Mm,
Howard K. Smith, Knowlton Nash, Harvey Kirk from
hmm.
CTV. So I have men like them embodied in Cronart's Robart's Chronic. I forget his exact name. Made it rather
Klondike?
complicated.
No.
Well, he's in chat. He gives a commentary. There's a commentary that I quote
Hmm.
that talks about how the spectralists are damaging Atlantean society bit by bit,
Hmm.
and he ends it with saying, "The gods help us all,"
Yes.
and it's where and I quote it as being where this guy and his "That's My Angle" commentary, where radio and TV announcers give commentary on the news.
Right. Yeah.
And this is just at the start of the graduation scene,
Hmm.
which starts with nice and sedate, but even though everybody's fidgeting because they can't use their calm crystals. But in the middle of the ceremony, the spectralists attack,
Mm.
and literally it takes a whole bunch of people to subdue them and put the chain them up in a very embarrassing state of dress where to humiliate them, but still it's where terrorism at something as sedate and revered as a graduation ceremony.
Hmm.
And
And end
that
up
was
being
part
satirizing. Yeah.
and that's a more serious version of something I saw at the end of Lord Love a Duck, that film from the 60s I mentioned,
Hmm.
where Roddy McDowall's character goes on a rampage using a tractor with a shovel. I forget what it's called. But he just goes on and running down the students, running down the teachers, and literally just before we find him in a prison cell recanting about why he did what he did. So I took a satirical mass murder scene and made it into a college riot where graduates and staff and faculty and guests were being attacked by rebellious terrorists.
Mm. Which, you know, again, can parallel life all too easily, right? So,
Right.
how long did it take you to write the book?
Well, it was published in 2020, and it took me, I'd say about 1 year, about a year to write.
Oh.
I tend to write fast,
Mm-hmm.
and
And when
I
you
have
start writing, do you know you're going to incorporate all of those different scenarios, or is it as you write they kind of pop into your mind?
well, what I do is I'm mostly a plotter when I write.
Mm-hmm.
But if there's something that I feel would add to the book, I put it in.
Mm-hmm.
If there's something I find that at first I liked it, but then I don't feel it
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't do anymore, I just take it out. But I operate to a basic plan that can change. And the one I'm working on now is actually a sequel to
Mm-hmm.
Ithiana, book one. It's book two, which picks up where book one leaves off pretty much.
Right.
And
How many
it's
are there going to be?
well, I haven't figured that out yet, but I want to work it out to where it's multiples of five. And if one book actually takes up more than one volume, I will say give the book number and then a -A, a -B, or even a -C, depending.
Right.
But I want to do it where what I plan to do is I want to want it to span the whole history of the universe as seen from the Judeo-Christian Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And let's just say the ending is planned.
Oh, so you know where you're going to stop.
I know how I'm going to stop, not so much where, but how.
Right. And so you're
And
going to take the journey yourself as you write it, but you know that's the
yes,
destination.
Yes, and I can give you a quick hint about what happens to the main character when just after the flood. She's kidnapped by aliens,
Ooh, ooh.
gray aliens, and that there are three levels of aliens, three levels of evil aliens. One, slave grays, which are like the diminutive, bulb-headed
Mm-hmm.
aliens we call the grays. The other is they're sort of like that, but they have but from the neck down, they have muscular bodies, hustle and muscle, taller, about maybe a little taller than average humans, but still very much who have more guts and are brutal. And then there's a blonde-haired, blue-eyed, fierce, platinum blonde-haired, piercing blue eye, and very pale-skinned sort of humanoids that look like you or me, but they are just too blonde to be true, too
Mm-hmm.
blue-eyed to be true, too fair-skinned to be true. And I've often thought it's in many ways, as I've been writing it, it's more about the enslaved humans
Mm.
and their faults than the bad aliens. And that
And
the
are
bad
all
these
aliens bad?
no, well, I decided to have my good aliens actually being full-blooded humans who went out among the stars well ahead
Mm.
of the flood.
Well, I
Or
see.
in and that there are the second crop of good aliens are, let's just say, they're freed human slaves that managed to liberate themselves from the grays and take on the technology and learn from it and actually decide to do right by God among the stars.
Mm. Very, very intriguing. Very intriguing. Wow, you've really encompassed a great deal in this, and you've really, you've done your research, but I also love the way you love to
Yeah.
layer things and reference things. And so for a
In
lot of
fact,
people, yeah, and for a lot of people when they're reading it, it's going to be, it's not just for youth, isn't it? It's for all ages. And for a
yes.
lot of people who will be reading it, they'll see the reference of where it comes from, and that can
Yeah.
make it more connectable as well.
And it's not just about Atlantis. I
Mhm.
did research into how the flood could have happened, what the world would have been like just before the flood. And for one thing, the axis we have now is give or take about 22 and a half degrees, give or take. But in but a lot of people who study creationism and who are creationists think that the world had a perpendicular axis, no
Mhm.
tilt at all, and that there was a water vapor canopy that I nicknamed the vaposphere, which filtered out more harmful rays than the ozone layer has done at its best.
Mm, interesting.
So, and that there was one continent, and even though a lot of people talk about Atlantis being a lost continent, Atlantis in my book was simply the most powerful nation on Earth,
Hmm.
and that it was part of a greater continent called Rodinia.
Mm.
It's a Russian term, but but Rodinia apparently predates Pangea in many people's minds. And so I decided, and I actually have a map. I actually have a picture of the world as it would have been the days of Noah, or at least of Rodinia. One hemisphere looks like it's a giant claw of a continent, but based on that, I put in the other side, and I call it the scorpion's tail because it looks sort of like a scorpion-like tail, and where there's a place in the book where there's a lot of fighting going on between the two nations of Crescentistan and the Gondiki Rajandom. And I use that as a commentary on the constant fighting going on between India and Pakistan.
Mm. So a lot of reference always to what's going on currently or
For
continually, you know.
recent history with the Indo-Pakistani conflict, it's more recent history post World War II.
Hmm.
And I actually have even though the climate was moist all over the world, there were two deserts made because of human evil. The one in the scorpion's tail were constant warfare kept things from growing. And then there's the one in the heart of the continent called the High Hills region, where apparently the Garden of Eden existed, but because Adam and Eve were driven out, the ones who were charged with dressing and keeping the Garden of Eden, they were driven out, and certain animals became carnivorous and ate others. The ones that could get out did, and then certain plants became weed-like and choked out the rest, and the last weed standing became humus, as along with the rest of the plants. And then the topsoil, the humus-rich topsoil, blew away because there was nothing to hold back or trap anything, and so it blew away and became an arid, near desert-like steppe, a giant one. So it was a testament to the damages sin can do on an ecological scale.
Everything has a balance.
Because when you have the vegetation and the flora and fauna being destroyed by one type of fauna killing off others, but the rest of them leaving, and then the flora choking each other out until there's no living flora left, and then it all becomes humus, blown away with the wind. Guess what you get?
Yeah.
A desert or a steppe.
Right. Wow, you really have got an incredible imagination, and the way you can weave it in with historical facts and is wonderful.
And
I'm
social
sure.
commentary.
Right, exactly. Can you show us the cover of the book?
Sure, just a moment. Okay. See it?
Yep, I do.
Hang on a sec. Just want to get the viewers to have a better view of it.
Right.
And so, Last Out of Atlantis, book 1. How the world ended millennia ago.
Wow. And so book 2 will be coming out when?
Well, I haven't figured that out yet. I just got to make arrangements about how to get about book 1 first. It's already out there. It's been around for some time, but I don't know how I'm going to publish book 2. But when I do, I'll let everybody know, because the story deserves to be told. The saga deserves to be told, because Ithiana is forced to go on a correctional odyssey, as I call it, because she's got a lot to learn and unlearn.
Right. Yes, you can't learn new things if you're saturated with old patterns. So
she in many ways, she's like too many people today that put too much stock in the world as we know it.
Yes.
We cannot lean on our own understanding, and when we do, God has to sometimes take us on a journey that literally rattles our timbers. Sometimes where the timbers come undone, and I haven't figured out when I'm going to publish it, but I'm just going to see how, because if I publish it again through a self-publisher, it will require money to do.
Right.
But if I can get a traditional publisher who's willing to publish the second book as well as and some more, it will come out. And I'll be honest, I'm new at this game of self-publishing. I'm new at this game of writing for publication in general. So when it's gonna take, I'm not sure quite how it's gonna be done, but
well, there's
an
awful lot of popularity for youth genre, which is where you will be targeting, and there's a lot of publishers that actually do, specialize in that. So it's definitely sending them your first book to show them that there is a second, third, and fourth to come. So I would just target those publishers, because that is what they do, and there's an awful lot of money for them in youth genres. Definitely. My brother's a youth genre writer as well, and adults can read the youth genre and get just as much out of it as the youth do.
Exactly. I've often thought, if I was to aim for a market, I'd aim mostly for an adult market, but in a way where kids could enjoy, because
young adult, right? Young adult.
Yeah, how many kids, how many children and youth around age 10 have loved science fiction stories that were apparently written for grown-ups,
right,
and made it their own?
Yes, exactly. And kids love sci-fi, and so yes, you're right, from the 10 up, but don't dismiss the adult, because the adult will get something else out of it. So it's really from 10 up. But if you hit the youth publishers, then they're going to target the youth, and adults will
Right.
follow. So now,
Yeah.
how do
And
people get hold of this book, Love? And how do
well,
they get hold of you?
well, first of all, about getting a hold of the book, they can order it from Amazon, Apple Books, if you want the electronic only version,
Hmm.
Barnes and Noble for print only versions. And by the way, the print only versions are both in hard and soft cover.
Neat.
And Friesen Press, same thing for hard cover, soft cover, and electronic. And then Google and Kindle for the electronic only version. So
Right.
I'll rhyme it off again in alphabetical order. Amazon, and it's all across the globe, Amazon. Apple, Barnes and Noble, Friesen Press, Google, and Kindle. And as far as my own personal website is concerned, I have one. It's www.donnyverse.com. I'll spell out the name Donnyverse,
Hmm.
and it's all lowercase. DONNYVERSE.com.
And would you also spell out the name of Lithiana, so when people
All
plug
right,
it in?
sure, no problem. Capital ITHYANNA.
And it's
I as in Indiana, T as in Tom, H as in horrible, A as in Albert, N as in Nancy, N again as in Nancy, and A as in Anna.
and it goes under the author of Don Edward Cook.
Yes. Not to be confused with Don Cook, the late journalist from Connecticut.
Right, right. Well, I'm very impressed. You've really put a lot of thought into this, and I know what it's, with my brother being an author, I know how much he puts into a book and where he has to go in order for everything to come together. So you've really done your homework on this, but you've also really allowed your imagination
Yes.
to go wild, but then harness it in so it becomes part of the story. So it isn't just a straightforward linear. It has all these different wonderful aspects of it that tie it all together.
Just like Rod Serling, for sure. Rod Serling's my biggest influence.
Right. Well, there's always that somebody that you really connect with, isn't it? And they are the inspiration begets invitation. He inspired you and invited you to see if you could write yourself. Right.
Sure.
This has been wonderful. Thank you so much, Don. And
thank you very much for having me.
My pleasure. And, folks, go out and get the book. Again, it doesn't matter about age, but if you've got youth at home and they really do love the wondrous world, at the same time, you're teaching them some reflection on history, on things that have gone on that you can actually have a conversation with them about, which is wonderful. So this is a great book. Next birthday, or just like, it's been a good week, here's a book. Or we're going away, here's a book. You don't need any special time for a book reading. Encourage your kids to read, please. And when they read a book that's really going to take them on so many multiple dimensions, it really is going to excite them and they're going to want the second book. So therefore you must leave a comment on Amazon and wherever else. And so when he takes it to a next publisher, that person is going to see how popular that book is. So let's support him in that way. Thank you so much, Don.
Thank you, Sarah. You take care and God bless you.
You too. Until next time, folks. Bye for now. We hope that you enjoyed the show right here on selfdiscoverymedia.com. Please tune in to our selfdiscoverymedia.com/shows and you will see all the other genres that we have from you. Every week on Tuesday, we bring you new shows from illuminating people. If you know someone that should be interviewed, please contact us at info@selfdiscoverymedia.com. Now stay tuned for your next show.